Hey everyone, it's me again, and today we are going to talk about anarchism. So, what is anarcho-capitalism? Well, it's capitalism, but it's anarchist, but at the same time, it's not anarchist. Let me explain. Anarchists have always aimed to bring equality to all and better the lives of their fellow humans. But anarcho-capitalists support, well, capitalism, an inherently hierarchical system, because in an ANCAP society we would have a hierarchy, as the MOP would be owned by a upper class and would as such make more money than the workers, therefore creating a unequal and hierarchical society, and therefore cannot be considered anarchist ideology. Okay, let's not dismiss ANCAPism just yet. Let's go further into its etymology. Anarchist means a society without rulers. Capitalism means that the MOP are owned privately. However, even if we look at it from this point of view, ANCAPism would still be hierarchical. So they have a lot of non-arguments against socialism and communism. Let's debunk some of them, shall we? Number 1. What about Venezuela? Ha ha, libtards owned. The issue with this argument is that 70% of Venezuela's means of production are owned privately. Number 2. Communism always fails. First of all, there has never been a communist country. Only socialist ones, and even those who claim to be socialist are usually not socialist, as the MOP are not owned socially by the working class, but by the state, and as such might as well be state capitalist. Number 3. Socialism always leads to more violence and suffering. This could be debunked by mentioning a time when socialism has worked and led to prosperity, and I can account for this by mentioning Burkina Faso under Sankarism. Here are some facts. Thomas Isidore Noel Sankara, born 21st December 1949, was a Burkinabe military captain, Marxist revolutionary, Pan-Africanist theorist, and President of Burkina Faso from 1983 to 1987, viewed by supporters as a charismatic and iconic figure of revolution. He is commonly referred to as Africa's Che Guevara. Among his achievements is the fact that he vaccinated 2.5 million children against meningitis, yellow fever, and measles in a matter of weeks. He initiated a nationwide literacy program, increasing the literacy rate from 13% in 1983 to 73% in 1987. He planted over 10 million trees to prevent desertification. He built roads and a railway to tie the nation together without foreign aid. He appointed females to high governmental positions, encouraged them to work, recruited them into the military, and granted pregnancy leave during education. He redistributed land from the feudal landlords and gave it directly to the peasants. Wheat production rose in 3 years from 1,700 kilograms per hectare to 3,800 kilograms per hectare, making the country food self-sufficient and effectively putting an end to feudalism in Burkina Faso. However, on October 15th, 1987, Sankara was killed by an armed group with 12 other officials in a coup d'état organized by his former colleague Blaise Compaoré. Deterioration in relations with neighboring countries was one of the reasons given, with Compaoré stating that Sankara jeopardized foreign relations with former colonial power France and neighboring Ivory Coast. Speaking of feudalism, I've heard a lot of leftists refer to ANCAPism as neo-feudalism. However, I find this to be an insult to feudalism, as at least for feudalism, we would have far better job security You see, ANCAPs want to privatize everything, even going as far as wanting to abolish the police services and replace such services with private security companies. However, what about those who cannot afford to pay such services? Do we just let them go undefended? Another issue I have with this ideology is that those who espouse it really do not understand it. This fine gentleman here is a prime example of this. Yes, everyone in an ANCAP society would still have public services, but they would be privately owned. Did I mention this guy's channel is called Esoteric Entity? The jokes write themselves, do they not? They also don't seem to understand Marxist terminology such as wage slavery. In fact, allow me to explain the term to our anti-egalitarian friends. Since the chattel slave is property, his value to an owner is in some ways higher than that of a worker who may quit, be fired, or replaced. The chattel slave's owner has made a great investment in terms of the money paid for the slaves. For this reason, in times of recession, chattel slaves could not be fired like wage laborers. A wage slave could also be harmed at no or less cost. American chattel slaves in the 19th century had improved their standard of living from the 18th century, and according to historians Fogel and Ingerman, plantation records show that slaves worked less, were better fed, and whipped only occasionally. Their material conditions in the 19th century being better than that was, typically available to free urban laborers at the time. This was partially due to slave psychological strategies under an economic system different from capitalist wage slavery. According to Mark Michael Smith of the Economic History Society, although intrusive and oppressive paternalisms, the way masters employed it and the methods slaves used to manipulate it rendered slaveholders' attempts to institute capitalistic work regimes on their plantations ineffective, and so allowed slaves to carve out a degree of autonomy. Unlike a chattel slave, a wage laborer can. Unlike a chattel slave, a wage laborer can choose between employers, but those employers usually constitute a minority of owners in the population for which the laborer must work, while attempts to implement workers' control on employers' businesses may be considered a act of theft or subordination, and thus met with violence, imprisonment, or other legal and social measures. The wage laborer's starkest choice is to work for an employer or to face poverty and starvation. If a chattel slave refuses to work, a number of punishments are also available, from beatings to food deprivation, although economically rational slave owners practiced positive reinforcement to achieve best results and before losing their investment by killing an expensive slave. Historically, the range of occupations and status positions held by chattel slaves had been highly broad as that held by free persons, indicating some similarities between chattel slaves and wage slavery as well. Like chattel slavery, wage slavery does not stem from some immutable human nature, but represents a specific response to material and historical conditions that reproduces the inhabitants, the social relations, the ideas, the social form of daily life. Similarities began to blur when proponents of wage labor won the American Civil War of 1861 and 1865, in which they competed for legitimacy with defenders of chattel slavery. Each side presented an over positive assessment of their own system while denigrating the opponent. Another issue I have with anarcho-capitalists is that they have never tried to make society better, as they care only for how many digits are in their profit margins. ANCOMs and libertarian socialists have contributed far more to society than ANCAPs have for the working class. You want examples? I'll give you an example. One rest day each week or legal ban on employers imposing work more than 6 days out of 7. Legal reduction of the working day to 8 hours for adults. A ban on children under 14 years working in private workshops. And between 14 and 16 years reduction of the working day from 8 to 6 hours. Protective supervision of apprentices by the workers' organizations. Legal minimum wage determined each year according to the local price of food by a workers' statistical commission. Legal prohibition of bosses employing foreign workers at a wage less than that of a French worker. Equal pay for equal work for workers of both sexes. Scientific and professional instruction of all children, with their maintenance the responsibility of society, represented by the state and the commune, responsibility of society for the old and the disabled, prohibition of all interferences by employers to the administration of workers, friendly societies, provident societies, etc., which are returned to the exclusive control of all the workers, responsibility of the bosses in the matter of accidents, guaranteed by security paid by the employer into the workers' funds and in proportion to the number of workers employed and the danger that the industry presents. Intervention by the workers in the special regulations of the various workshops. An end to the right usurped by the bosses to impose any penalty on their workers in the form of fines or withholding wages. Annulment of all the contracts that have alienated public property. This would include things such as banks, railways, mines, etc., and the exploitation of all state-owned workshops to be entrusted by the worker who worked there. Abolition of all indirect taxes and transformation of all direct taxes into a progressive tax on income over 3,000 francs. Suppression of all inheritance on a collateral line and of all direct inheritance over 20,000 francs. Now ask yourselves, what have ANCAPs done for the working class in society? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. A lot of ANCAPs make fallacious claims, such as that the co-ops are not successful business models, which is not a sensible statement. If you want to see an example of, co-ops, go to Mondragon.com. Let's face it, the anarcho-capitalism is not anarchism. Its members are ignorant, and it has never contributed to the working class or the betterment of society. We also have this vote with your wallet idea, which is not practical, even on paper. What about the poor, who cannot vote with their wallet? Another issue is that many companies have monopolies or syndicates. An example of this is the fact that Nestle owns dozens of other companies, but even if we were to account for these disparities somehow, it is contradictory to the simple fact that not everyone is logical, as people would still have emotions, and if human nature is anything to go by, people would make emotional choices, not logical choices. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of anti-ANCAPs have called ANCAPism neo-feudalism. However, I contested this, but if ANCAPism is neo-feudalism, I am sure they would show their true colors sometime soon, as they would be hiding their society behind a mask. However, dialectics has told us this will not last. Speaking of philosophical dialectics, this reminds me of a moral argument ANCAPs use, which is that communism has killed 200 million, which of course is a erroneous claim, but let's not get hung up on that. So the whole idea is that if communism has killed more people then capitalism must be the superior system to communism. However, capitalism has killed way more people than communism has, and I am going to prove it. Capitalism's death toll of the slave trade, the lowest estimate is to be somewhere between 60 and 100 million. That's the Atlantic slave trade, the East and North African slave trade and slaves taken to Europe. There's also the millions killed within Africa. Africa's population did not rise for 400 years, while Europe's had doubled. And lastly, slaves had double the child mortality rate of free people. Let's talk about all the genocides, shall we? Against the natives of the Americas, it is estimated to be somewhere between 75 and 112 million deaths. Columbus alone killed over 3 million. Yes, imperialism was another contributing factor, but not as great as greed and land theft. The gold and silver theft from the Americas is what created capitalism. Europeans and their American descendants stole tens of trillions of worth of land. And no, disease spread was not accidental. Colonists knew they were spreading disease. Any readings of their accounts show that. They just didn't care and thought their greed mattered more than the human lives of the natives. Colonial empires. It's somewhere in the tens of millions. There's some overlap with the two above. Should King Leopold's death toll of 10 million in the Congo be counted as imperialism or the slave trade? Well, it was both. The British killed tens of millions in multiple man-made famines in India and Ireland, committed genocide in Australia and Kenya, Germans against the Herero, and French atrocities in Haiti and Algeria. The drug trade, including tobacco, has killed 7 million deaths currently each year from tobacco, smaller from illegal drugs. The numbers have actually dropped in recent years, but were lower far back in the past from a smaller population. Obviously, many deaths from alcoholism and drunk driving should be included, but only if the industries were trying to profit from them, no matter the human cost. The drug war totals are 500,000 each in Mexico and Colombia. Similar numbers from gang wars in the US, that's over the last half century by the way. Prohibition deaths should also be included. 200 million in the past 300 years might be a low estimate. Deaths during strikes are in the tens of thousands. Some of the more notorious are the Great Uprising after Reconstruction, where over 300 strikers were murdered. Fascism has a death toll of 30 million. Fascism is the anti-democratic form of capitalism. Hitler, Mussolini, Chiang Kai-shek's fascism, Franco in Spain, all these men have quite the death toll. Other than that, we have the anti-communist dictatorships. Several million. You see, there are countless of these examples, but let's look at two of them. Indonesia's Suharto, who alone killed 500,000 to 1,000,000, somewhere in between those numbers. Pinochet in Chile, backed by TI&T. Mobutu in the Congo put into power with the backing of foreign mining interests. And the cherry on top is that capitalism now threatens all life on Earth through global warming, nuclear war, and the ensuing nuclear winter. Libertarians will make the claim that this was all corporatism's fault. Okay, fine. Then let's talk about a time when anarcho-capitalism was put into practice, shall we? The Congo under Leopold II. In the 1880s, the entirety of the Congo was Leopold's private property under his rule. Leopold hand-picked governors, each of whom he gave dictatorial powers over their realms. Each official was paid entirely by commission, and as such had great incentive to pillage the soil to the maximum of his ability. Violence was commonplace on rubber plantations. These establishments took a lot of work to maintain, and rubber trees can't really grow on a commercial scale in an old growth rainforest. Clear cutting that forest is a big job that delays the crop and cuts into profits. Who fail to meet their ivory and gold quota, even once, would face mutilation with hands and feet being the most popular site for amputation. If the man could not be caught, or if he needed both hands to work, forces publiques, men would cut the hands off of his wife or children. Leopold's policies still take toll on the Congolese today. The life of a modern citizen of the DRC sounds like what you'd expect for a society that went through the political equivalent of an abusive childhood. Compared to the average American, the Congolese are 12 times more likely to die in infancy, have a life expectancy 23 years shorter, make 99.24% less money, spend 38% less on healthcare, and are 83.33% more likely to be HIV positive. Tell me, does that sound like a paradise? No, no, it doesn't. Anarcho-Capitalism is not a respectable political philosophy. It's a joke, a bad and messy practical joke. It is simply too idealistic to ever work. That's all I'm going to say.